Hey everyone, so today's video would be about preferences and axioms of rationality. Now, to start with preferences, in English we know that preference is liking of something, but in field of economics we can define preferences as a consumer's willingness to buy something given his ability to buy it. Now, before I start with our explanation, I would like to inform you that here we are making few assumptions. The first assumption is that we are going to consider two goods, which are X and Y, where X is apples and Y is bananas. And a bundle that represents quantities of X and Y looks like this. Now, to classify preferences, we can categorize preferences in three categories, which are strict preference, indifference, and weak preference. Starting first with strict preference, as the name itself suggests, that the consumer is strictly preferring something over the other entirely. Suppose we have two bundles, A and B, and a consumer says that he strictly prefers A over B. Then we can symbolically represent it like A strictly prefers over B, where this sign is of strict preference. Or we can use a P in between A and B, where P also denotes that the consumer is strictly preferring A over B. Now, to see this with an example, suppose we have a bundle that has 5 units of apples and 6 units of bananas, and the second bundle has 2 units of apples and 3 units of bananas. So it is obvious that the consumer would prefer the bundle that has higher quantities of both the goods, because in economics a rational consumer would always want to consume more of a good that gives him positive satisfaction or positive utility. So he will definitely consider that 5 units of apples and 6 units of bananas give him more utility or satisfaction. So 5 6 is strictly preferred over 2 3. Now, secondly, the second in preferences is indifference. Indifference means that a consumer is not able to choose one bundle over the other, or we can say that the consumer believes that the satisfaction he gets from, say, consuming a bundle A would be as same as from the other bundle, that is B. This leads to his indecision. And if we want to symbolically represent indifference, then we can say that A is indifferent to B, meaning A is the utility derived from A is same as B, where this symbol is denoted, is usually used to represent indifference. Or alternatively, we can use a I sign in between A and B. This also represents indifference. Now, to see this with an example again, suppose we have a bundle which is the same bundle as before, 5 6, but now the other bundle is 6 5. Now the consumer is really indifferent. He cannot make a decision whether to consume 5 units of apples and 6 units of bananas, or to consume 6 units of apples or 5 units of bananas, because he likes both the goods in the same quantity. So he likes both good in same, we can say, quantitatively. So here he is very much indifferent between the two. So he is indifferent, or we can say that he doesn't really care what bundle he consumes. He is satisfied with any of them. Lastly, we see weak preferences. Weak preferences are actually a combination of strict preference and indifference. Now, if I were to explain you this with a scenario, suppose we have two scenarios where A is weakly preferred over B and B is weakly preferred over A. Meaning, here in this scenario, the consumer believes that A is at least as good as B, and B is at least as good as A. So what is the hidden implication here? The consumer is saying that he thinks at A is at least as good as A. A is at least as good as B, and B is at least as good as A. So here we can say the hidden implication here is that the consumer believes A and B both will give him the same amount of utility if he consumes any of them. So by this conclusion, we can conclude that A is indifferent. A is indifferent to B, meaning this scenario points us to back to the indifferent scenario. And suppose we have the second scenario where the consumer says he is weakly preferring A over B, but he does not weakly prefer B over A. What does it mean? It means that the consumer, if we give him choice between A and B, the consumer would take A over B, but he won't take B over A. The hidden implication behind this again is that the consumer strictly prefers A over B, which indicates us back to our first category of preferences. Now if I were to explain you the how to represent weak preference, then it is represented by A weakly preferred over B, where we use a sign of strict preference with a small dash beneath it, and similar, or we can represent it like A R B, where we use R in between A and B, which represents weak preference. Now next we would see some axioms of rationality. Now looking at few axioms of rationality, first I would like to tell you that these axioms of rationality are general rules and guidelines that are used in economic analysis, and that we must adhere to these rules to work with our economic analysis. We will consider that a consumer will always be following these axioms intentionally or unintentionally, because if he does not, then his behavior would be considered peculiar and our economic analysis would fail. Now I would be covering three most important axioms of rationality in this video, that are: the first is completeness, then reflexive and transitive. Now starting with completeness, we can explain completeness such that preferences should be complete. It means that a consumer's preferences should be comparable. A consumer should be able to say that he prefers X over Y, or he prefers Y over X, or he is indifferent between X and Y. Here the main point to note is that the consumer shouldn't be saying that he don't know about his preferences, because every individual has a unique set of preferences. So he should be able to state his own preferences as well. Now the second is reflexive, and this can be summed up in a sentence, but that is, any bundle is as good at itself. What does it mean? It means that suppose we have two identical bundles of X. Here the cases of both strict preference and indifference would hold. Why? Because the consumer may believe that he is preferring one particular unit of X that is identical with the other, but he is still preferring that more, or the case must be is that he is just indifferent between the two. So this was reflexive. Now the third is transitive, which can be considered the most important axiom. Transitive axiom says that if we have a bundle X that is preferred over Y, and we have a bundle Y that is preferred over Z, then it can be concluded that the bundle X is preferred over Z. This idea can be extended to indifference and weak preferences as well, where we can say if X and Y are if the consumer is indifferent between x and y and he is indifferent between y and z, then he must be indifferent between x and z. Now to see with an example and from our earlier assumption of apples and bananas, suppose we have a bundle that is 7 and 8, which means 7 units of apples and 8 units of bananas, which is preferred over 5 units of apples and 6 units of bananas. And the second bundle, that is 5 and 6, is preferred over 2 units of apples and 3 units of bananas. Then it can be concluded that the consumer would prefer 7 units of apples and 8 units of bananas over 2 units of apples and 3 units of bananas. The first bundle will always be preferred over the third, because this is a chain of preferences, as you can see. Now if we see another example which indicates indifference, then if from our earlier example again, if we have a bundle 6 5 and 5 6, then and if the consumer is indifferent between these two, and there is another bundle that is 7 4 and consumer is indifferent between 5 6 and 7 4, then it can be again concluded that the consumer would be indifferent between 6 and 5 and 7 and 4, simply because he believes that consuming any of these bundles would be giving him same level of satisfaction. Now there are few more axioms of rationality that I would like to cover, and I would be covering them in my next video. Thank you for watching.